He was the person you went to when you were stuck. 20 years in the field, and it showed. You could describe a problem for 30 seconds, and he'd already have the answer, usually the right one. Fast, sharp, generous with it. His team loved that about him. So did he. I'm just trying to help them, he'd say. Why would I make them struggle with something I can already solve? And he was helping. In the moment. Every time, he was helping. Here's what it cost. And like most of these, it hid behind how helpful it looked. His team stopped thinking. Not because they were lazy, because thinking had become pointless. Why work a problem for an hour when you could walk down the hall and have the answer in 90 seconds? Every time he answered, he taught them the same quiet lesson. Don't bother building your own judgment. Mine is faster, and it's right here. So they didn't. They brought him the problem instead of a proposal. They waited at his door instead of taking the swing. He'd hired a room full of sharp people and slowly trained them to stop using the thing that made them sharp. And it got worse in a way he didn't see. Judgment is a muscle, and his people never got to use theirs. He was doing their reps for them. They weren't getting weaker because they were incapable. They were getting weaker because every rep went to him. He'd hired a bunch of future leaders and turned it into a queue. When he was out, the work didn't stop the way it does for some. It just went shallow. Decisions got made, but only as far as the team could reach without him. He read that as proof that they needed him. It was actually proof he'd never let them grow past needing him. I said to him, "Your team is full of sharp people. And I don't think your problem is too many answers. I think you've made your answers the only ones that count. And a team that waits for your answer isn't a team, it's a waiting room. When you have all the answers, you stop leading. You start dispensing." He pushed back. So I should withhold what I know, watch them flounder when I could help? That feels like ego, like I'm making them prove something. I said, maybe. Or maybe the most generous thing you can do isn't handing them the answer. It's handing them the question. What have you tried? What would you do if I were on vacation? What's your read? You're not withholding. You're returning the rep. The answer helps them once. The question builds the person who won't need to ask the next time. That's the pattern. And it's one of the most generous. Looking failures in the and that's the pattern. And it's one of the most generous looking failures in the neighborhood because it wears the costume of expertise and help. But underneath, for a lot of oracles, the answering is doing something quieter. It's worth. Being the one with the answer is how he knows he matters. Every question that arrives at his door is a small confirmation that he's still the sharpest one in the building. So he answers fast and he calls it service. And he mistakes being needed for being useful. He tried something that felt to him like being unhelpful. For 2 weeks, when someone brought him a problem, he wasn't allowed to answer it. He could only ask questions. What do you think is going on? What are your options? Which one would you pick and why? The first few times were painful. Long silences, people waiting for the rescue. He sat in the silence. And then something happened. They started answering their own questions. Not perfectly, but the proposals got sharper every week, because for the first time, the reps were theirs. Slowly, the line at his door got shorter. Not because they needed him less, but because they were arriving with answers instead of questions, wanting a gut check instead of a rescue. His best analyst made a call he wouldn't have made, and it was better than his would have been. The team he'd been carrying started carrying itself. And here's the part he wrestled with. It cost him something real. Being the one with every answer had felt like importance. Learning to be the person who builds judgment in others, instead of the person who is the judgment, that felt at first like becoming less brilliant. He had to learn that the smartest thing in the room was never his answer. It was the number of people who could now find their own. One thing to try. This week, catch yourself the next 3 times someone brings you a problem you could solve in 10 seconds. Don't solve it. Ask one question instead. What would you do? And then be quiet long enough for them to answer. Notice how hard the silence is to hold. Hold it anyway. Here's the question. Is your team bringing you their thinking or just their problems? And if it's only problems, are you the one they can't work without, or the reason they never had to learn. I'm Don Nation. This is the Leaders in Our Neighborhood. I'll see you next Friday.